concentrate on Ministry of Information Technology, DIT, he refuses to call it DIT, and DOT, and USOF. You want to take over? Are you ready?
I'll focus on domestic regulatory bodies that we have around the internet in India. And before I do, I'll just present the conclusions right up front. Okay, one, that there is a surprising lack of coherence and consistency in internet-related policy making in India. Okay, we find that sometimes multiple departments and bodies have oversight over the same kind of thing. Sometimes we find that the folks who are working around copyright regulation are pushing in one particular direction, whereas the folks working on other content regulation are pushing in an opposite direction. And these kinds of stories will emerge through what I tell you. Right? The second is that sometimes the departments and agencies involved, they compete with each other rather than cooperating with each other. And that can sometimes be an issue as well. And lastly, and quite important for us, the methods of interacting with the public. Okay, that each of these are open to different degrees. I'll start off with the one which is obvious, which is the Department of Electronics and Information Technology, DEIT. Right? If you look at its functions, it includes everything from electronics and IT industry, cyber law policy, internet governance, e-governance, knowledge management for IT, R&D, and international liaising. However, I'll focus on a few of these. So first, and especially those which are important from a policy perspective, and from a general, you know, from a perspective of the general populace and average citizens. One of the most important from this perspective is the body known as CERT-IN. This is the Computer Emergency Response Team of India, and this is a body that was set up in 2000 under the Information Technology Act, and it has been given a broad range of powers. CERTs across the world are generally those bodies which respond to a large, denial of service attack that a country faces, or issues advisories on things as new malware, security problems, new viruses, etc. India, that isn't quite so. In India, in 2003, we passed a particular a notification under the Information Technology Act, which brought content-related regulation as well under certain. Okay, now we've had content regulation in India happening without any law since before the Information Technology Act happened. So there was no law that allows specifically for blocking websites. Yet from 96 onwards, we know that at least since then, websites have been blocked in India. And in 2003, there was a specific mandate provided under the clause, which, related to obscenity. Okay, specific mandate provided to certain body that deals with security related issues to regulate content and to be able to block websites. Very unfortunately, the parent act, the Information Technology Act itself, did not have any such provisions. Okay, so it's a body called certain which has been given powers without the parliament approving that. So, and in 2008 amendments, this power has been removed from CERT and been placed in and the elaborate procedure has been put in place, and for the first time officially Parliament has allowed for the blocking of websites from 2008 amendment onwards. And surprisingly, the person who heads CERT is also the person who's been designated as the officer for blocking of websites still. Okay, so officially CERT is no longer responsible. The person who's to be designated as the designated officer is the same old head of CERT who's been responsible for content blocking since the good old days. Another important sub-body is the NIC, the National Informatics Center. This is the group which is responsible for interconnecting the different government departments, and as part of that role, they've also had the role of developing software and developing websites, very importantly. So the reason that a lot of the websites you access, which are government websites, are .nic.in is because of this historical reason, whereas .gov.in has existed from the very beginning, but because NIC was developing them, they provided them under their own TD. Similarly, there's the StQC, which is a standard setting and quality control body under DIT, and this is very important because when you interact with the government, they require you to do so particular standards, okay, and they set standards for all other governmental applications as well. And it becomes very important so that because you as a citizen can, if a bad standard is prescribed by the StQC, can be required to pay royalty fees and be required to pay money, for instance, in the form of a Microsoft tax, okay, in order to be able to interact with the government. Okay, if they say you have to use .doc format. Okay, so the StQC, amongst other things, also is involved in setting of formats, and right now it's also responsible for the open standards policy that we have in India, which allows you to interact with the government without having to pay any kind of royalties. If at any point you have any kind of questions or anything, please do interrupt me. And one other note over here, okay, which is the relationship between internet governance, cyber laws and policies, and e-governance. So e-governance, as the government of India envisages it, is completely about how the government interacts with citizens, and so it doesn't involve any laws, etc., except for the now proposed e-service delivery bill, which is going through the motions, and the standing committee of Parliament just had a look at it last year, and it's still in the motions right now. But internet governance has historically been about how issues such as freedom of speech, privacy, domain name management, open standards, because those are required for interoperability on the internet, how all of these are managed, right, and how all of these are governed. And cyber laws and policies, as the Indian government says, is about when this happens at the national level. The problem is that internationally, India's position when it comes to internet governance is far more open and far more respectful of human rights than when it comes to its domestic policy making. And there is no interaction whatsoever between these two subdivisions of the Department of Electronics and Information Technology. So on the one hand, we have very restrictive laws in India, but what we are advocating internationally happens to be very progressive. And so there is this strange dichotomy that arises because of this. And on interactions on policy making, the uh, the DEIT is actually one of the most public organizations this way. For quite a number of policies, they actually publish drafts, and for even for their rules, etc., such as the IT rules that they passed in 2011. Unfortunately, when the public does send comments, one, you never get to see it on the page, so you never get to know who sent in comments, what those comments are, whether they were positive or negative. And secondly, those comments are very seldom taken into consideration when it actually comes to finalizing the law. Okay, so I'll give one example from what we faced at CIS. When it came to the IT rules, we criticized it quite heavily, and our comments, and we pointed out why exactly it would be unconstitutional in its current form, and we also said what the government could do instead. Yet, the change from the draft rules to the final rules were actually a step backward. Initially, only the government could request, intermediaries such as Google, etc., to remove content. In the final version, anyone could. So right now, anyone can just write to Google, and they have to, under Indian law, remove the content within 36 hours. And we actually went a step further. We actually sent an RTI request asking for all the submissions made to the government to be sent to us. And we produced a chart, okay, saying these are the people, these are the submissions they made on section 1, section 2, section 3, etc. And these are the final version that was that was brought out. What we found was precisely one objection from an industry body was incorporated, whereas 11 sets of comments were sent, and 3 or 4 of those quite clearly spoke about unconstitutionality of the rules. Okay, the one change was from 24 hours, okay, which was the time given to a intermediary to react. They made it 36 hours. Other than this one change, they didn't change anything else based on the comments. So this is quite this is of concern. On the other hand, there have been positive instances as well, such as when the National Open Standards Policy was being drafted. We at CIS sent in feedback. A large number of free software groups sent in feedback. And that feedback proved very important in the drafting process. So all of that feedback was actually incorporated. So just goes to show that the government actually isn't monolithic. Next, I'll briefly talk about the Department of Telecommunications. Its functions include policy making, and these include policies on things such as licenses under which ISPs, telcos, etc. operate in India. So in India, if you want to set up any of these, you have to get a license from the Department of Technology. This also includes policies on things such as spectrum management, and also includes the laws under which DOT operates, or which the DOT administers, namely the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, the Indian Wireless Act of 1933, and the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India Act 1997. Apart from this, the DOT is also responsible for things such as international cooperation, including at the ITU. This is quite important because at the ITU, amongst other things, allocation of spectrum for specific purposes is also discussed. And this is quite important so that we are able to import equipment manufactured elsewhere in conformity with a particular standard. Okay, say for instance hardware that allows for communication on the 2.4 megahertz range, right? And things like that. Sorry, gigahertz range, and then there's also research and development. It's also responsible for investment promotion and financing, the Universal Service Obligation Fund, and there's still some remnants of manufacturing that the Department of Telecom still does, and service provision through things such as BSNL and MTNL. It has a large number of sub-bodies. I'll focus on two of them for the moment. Okay, one of which is the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. This is in some ways a poster child in terms of public interactions. It is arguably the most open and public body that under the government of India, and allows for the public to actually participate in rule making and policy making, and at every step of the way. The criticisms I leveled at the DIT, for instance, that the opinions of the public, when it's submitted, it isn't put up on the website. Those kinds of problems aren't there with TRI. The one problem with TRI, until recently, its website was horrendously difficult to navigate, and now it's not horrendously difficult, it's just difficult. So so there's some improvements happening of that sort. But TRI is responsible now for a wide variety of things. Because when it was set up in '97, the focus was on convergence. The idea that a large number of different kinds of services would be provided through a single medium, or through a single set of networks, etc. So TRI actually not only covers things that come under, solely under the Department of Telecom, also covers some things under that come under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, such as the including content on cable networks, etc. And TRI is also something you should thank for at some points lowering costs of mobile telephony, and at some points it actually has made rulings that increase these costs as well. So recently, for instance, they ruled on the Department of Telecom based on a TRI recommendation, ruled on sharing of licenses of 3G spectrum between different countries. So Vodafone, for instance, was in Karnataka providing 3G services, even though it didn't have a license to do so, because it was
US SOAF funds are now allocated for the National the fiber optic plan, right? So it was unsuccessful, although they did, a lot of telecoms could apply to the funds for rural connectivity. That didn't work, so now they've put it all in infrastructure. I think.
But to me, this
actually, when we talk about they are slow in spending and they are not willing to spend, it is not the case. Actually, what happens whenever anything goes with the government, you have to comply with certain transparencies of CVC. Like, if I know one territory is there which is lacking in communication, so if I want to provide it, I have to come out with a tendering document, and everybody is to be given a chance in a transparent manner. So all those things, governmental procedures, they delay the things. It is not that they do not want to do that. Actually, money is lying with them, and every operator has to give 8% of their sales to them. So they are collecting the money. Only thing is how they can make it in such a manner, because that governmental spending rule comes. They have to comply to CVC guidelines, CAG guidelines, and all those things. That's why it is keeping it slow.
And one other area where this is seen is in how BSNL has to comply with a large number of requirements that private companies don't have to, which has, for instance, held up procurement of switches and routers and networking technology by BSNL by multiple years, because court cases are going on about the procurement process and whether it was fair or not. And so that is also another side of expecting the government to be corporate-like.
Basically targeted to build infrastructure to areas which would not be profitable for private telecom companies.
And also to service marginalized communities.
Marginalized.
For gender and for
Right. But I don't think there is a separate component for the USOF to target slum communities in the urban areas, which despite the density, which will accrue benefits, are being left out because of the tenure issues and title issues. So I don't think there's a separate component, urban component to it, right?
So that is a fair criticism of the USOF, and as far as I know, also there isn't underserved communities within places such as urban areas don't get covered under the USOF. There are some other bodies as well, such as the Ministry of Human Resource Development, which has a $1 billion fund called the NPTEL, which I mentioned in the History of the Internet in India presentation, which was formed in 2001, and that is again a fund that has been underspent a bit, and much more could be done in terms of usefully spending that money. Apart from NPTEL, there are provisions relating to the MHRD also covers copyright related issues in India. And this becomes very important because until last year, until 2012, search engines were technically illegal in India. So because search engines, all of them create caches of the web pages that they search. They don't do live searches on all the websites that are out there in the world. And creating those kinds of caches was not covered by any exception in the Copyright Act. In fact, it was made an infringing act. Okay? And so last year we amended the law to actually make Google legal in India. On the other hand, while the IT Act recognizes copyright as an exception and says more or less that the Copyright Act will fall outside the scope of regulation of Google, etc., under the IT Act, yet the intermediary rules that I spoke about, the IT rules, those rules cover copyright as well. Again, another instance of inconsistencies within this domain of internet-related policymaking. That on the one hand, the law, the act, the parent act under which the rules are made says copyright is excluded, but the rules include copyright. And when those rules were passed, the Copyright Office had no clue that those rules had been passed, and I was talking to the copyright registrar, and he wasn't very clear how to interpret the law either, because this was his domain, which according to him, the Department of Electronics and Information Technology was usurping. So, and now we come to the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now, MHA has a large amount of influence on internet regulation in India. we see, for instance, the licenses that I spoke about that cover ISPs and the Universal Access, the UAS license, etc. Those have portions of them which are relating to security processes. Among them, for instance, is the requirement that mobile phone operators, for instance, don't use encryption beyond 40-bit encryption, okay, on their networks, okay, which means that not only the government but anyone with what is known as an IMSI catcher, okay, which are quite cheap, or anyone with just a standard, phone such as a standard phone which is jacked into a computer, okay, can actually catch and intercept conversations that are happening around. Okay, because by weakening security to allow for governmental interception, you're allowing for interception by anyone. Now, these provisions are controlled by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And how do we know this? Because the Department of Telecom is right now, and TRI is overhauling these licenses and has undertaken the task of getting comments on these licenses and seeing how they should be changed. Yet these particular provisions, okay, are not being touched because the Ministry of Home Affairs has told DOT that these can't be touched. And now there's a new cybersecurity coordinator who's been appointed under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So a new post has been created to coordinate the internet-related security work done by all the intelligence agencies and all the all the regular police departments as well, okay, under this one command. Now earlier, certain was supposed to be that. Then there was a new body created under the IT Act, which was supposed to be that. And now yet another new body, okay, has been created. So there are a number of such coordinator bodies, all of which are the new coordinator. Okay, so there's that, again, the same theme of lack of consistency, okay, between what the DIT is doing and what the MHA is doing is also shown yet again. The MHA has a lot of influence even on other kinds of things. For instance, in August last year, if you recall, there were a large number of websites that were blocked during the Northeast exodus that happened in Bangalore. Now, all of this was actually controlled by the MHA, and interestingly, one editor of a newspaper blames it squarely on, blames the panic squarely on the MHA, because rather than the internet, there was not too much spread of these messages happening on the internet. If you actually were on these social networks, you saw that these messages started going viral much later, around the 17th of August, and not earlier, around the 14th, 15th of August, when the panic actually started building up. What happened around the 14th, 15th of August was the MHA telling the Ministry of Railways, okay, to sanction special trains, because there was some murmur that folks from the Intelligence Bureau had noted. And because of this, there's, if there's a special train that's there to take you back home, okay, then obviously you'll believe the government, right? And so he identifies that as the main crux of why there was a panic and the sanctioning of special trains, and not the messages that purportedly came from Pakistan or elsewhere. And now lastly, there's the ultimate lawmaking body in India, which is the Parliament of India. And the Parliament of India, both in the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha, has multiple subcommittees. And there are subcommittees that look into issues relating to the matters of DIT, DOT, and technology, etc. And those have a mandate to inspect all the laws that are proposed by the government, which are when as and when they are sent by Parliament to the subcommittees. And there's also the subcommittee on subordinate legislation, which at one point of time was completely non-functional, but in the past 3 years has been seen to actually pass some recommendations which have been taken seriously. Okay, in the past they just didn't, gather, and they didn't. It wasn't as though their recommendations weren't taken seriously, but they didn't issue any recommendations at all. Most recently, they issued their analysis of the IT rules after some policy organizations highlighted the fact that these laws were quite defective and quite possibly unconstitutional. The chairman of the committee took note of that, and they actually passed their analysis, which damns the government and points out the inconsistencies even within the rules that were framed by the government and what the government actually said in its press releases. So slowly, this is opening itself up as another venue for policy interventions. And I think I've more or less covered everything, except there's a little bit about the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which is also getting into content regulation online. If you look at the last draft that they've proposed of the Registration of Books Act, okay, you'll see that in the name of press regulation, which comes under MIB, okay, they've also sought to extend those powers online. And as you might know, all newspapers in India have to be registered with the government under an archaic British law. Okay, that is not a requirement for any website in India. Tehelka.com, when it first launched, didn't have to register with MIB. And nor does any blogger who performs that kind of role as a valuable, that's also a valuable form of journalism. Yet now, under the new proposed law, they might have to be registered with the government. And that, I'm not sure how well that will sit with the way the internet actually works. So one other theme I might perhaps add to the three that I identified earlier is that a lot of the policy making that's going on right now is seeking to apply older world analogies and regulations to the internet in a way that it doesn't quite fit, without recognizing the differences that are brought about by the internet. So while I wouldn't, for instance, argue that things which are crimes offline, just because they're committed online, shouldn't be crimes. Okay, for instance, defrauding someone offline is just as much, online is just as much a crime as defrauding them offline. Okay, and even speech-related regulations. So defamation online, the same law under the IPC still applies online as well, right? So without realizing these kinds of things, without realizing that the obscenity law offline will apply online as well, that has been covered again in the IT Act. So we have another new provision relating to obscenity just for the online world. And similarly, there are all kinds of inconsistencies. And if they're appointing a coordinator, okay, they should just appoint a coordinator for everything relating to the internet who would advise all these disparate bodies who don't seem to get these basics. So I'll end with that. Any questions, queries, comments?
Like there have so many states, and the population of each of these states is far higher than some of the countries. But how do you explain that whereas those countries have, like internet content in their languages like Japanese and other things, that there hasn't developed content in local languages in India? That's one reason, one question. The second one is, we talked of the USOF as a funding and policy making thing body, and there is also like the FCC in US and the US, and they have also got a like a US. No. They like TRI is FCC, but they also have a universal service fund, and it's like, how do you? I mean, if the whole purpose is to spread the net, if ultimately the thing is, okay, you have a statistic that 10% of Indians are using it. So you must have a say like, okay, I'm going to have 20% by this year, 30% by that year, or you have a comparison with the US or something. And how do you get there? And definitely in terms of policy issues, the key things is school education and hospitals. And if high-speed internet were made free to libraries, schools, and hospitals, this and that funded out of USO. So what is what needs to be done?
So I think that I'm not the person who's qualified to answer these. That we do have a separate session on access, okay, in which these would be covered, right? But just a quick comment that the National Broadband Plan actually does talk in terms of numbers of in terms of ambitions. By saying that by 20, actually I don't remember the figures off the top of my head right now, that by 2020 this is the vision for where we will be in terms of penetration. But I can say that it's very ambitious. The second point on languages, again, not quite within the, there is a body called TDIL, okay, under DIT, okay, which is supposed to deal with Indian languages, and CDOT has CDAC under DIT again has been working on Indian language computing for a long time, including attempts to develop OCR technologies for Indian languages. Now, while there has been a lot of money put into these, okay, there has been very little progress and very little to actually show for that money. For instance, the software that the government has developed, okay, and the fonts that they initially developed, Verint licensed openly. So people, general public, couldn't use them, okay, couldn't develop on them, couldn't improve them, etc. Okay, they weren't. The DIT even has created its own operating system based on Debian Linux, okay, called BOSS, okay, Bharat Operating System, right, BOSS, and even that, while they're making changes to customize it for India and for Indian languages specifically, those changes aren't being pushed upstream. Okay, so while those who use BOSS, okay, which is a very small number of people, will have those enhancements, okay, but those who use Debian, which is the world's biggest Linux distribution, okay, won't have those benefits because these people, the government is making modifications and not sharing it with the rest of the world. So I think a lot of it is also about a particular mindset within governmental departments where you see that people who, the CDAC software is closed, is not released openly. You have to take permission for some of the OCR software. You actually have to send them an email and then they'll allow you to gain access to it, etc. Whereas people from CDAC, okay, are using, you know, open source software to actually develop OCR that other people are contributing to as well. Okay, so I think it's not as though they don't have, you know, smart scientists within CDAC. They do, but they are, you know, there are twin tracks happening. They're also providing for software that the general public can use, and also developing it in a very closed manner within that community.
Is that not a violation of GPL license to kind of develop something from, take it from the free software and then not make it freely available to others and make it closed? Because they are also governed by this copy left and GPL license.
Yes, but the GPL only applies, the GPL doesn't apply to Debian as a whole. Okay, and this is getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritties of copyright law, and I will explain some of this later when I deal with free software movement on Tuesday. But I'll just give a little bit of a short primer right now. Most of the standards that we spoke about this morning are actually all of them are open standards. All of them can be implemented by anyone without payment of any royalties and have been developed in an open fashion where multiple people could contribute to it. Similarly, almost all of the software that the internet runs on is free software, meaning software that you can use without permission, that you can study without taking anyone's permission. So the source code is available for you to actually study, that you can modify without any permission, that you can redistribute and give to other people without taking any permission. Okay, this kind of software is what runs everything from the DNS servers. Okay, the three largest DNS server implementations in the world, all three of them are free software. All of the largest email implementations in the world, with the exception of Microsoft Exchange, okay, all of the rest are all free software. Okay, and most of the world web servers are served using free software. Okay, and so you see that the internet is largely built on free software, and Linux, taken as an operating system, okay, is also free software. Now, the government of India, when developing its own version of Linux for the BOS operating system, has taken from the largest Linux flavor called Debian, okay, and then has made these changes, as I mentioned, okay, and is now distributing it. Now, the question is, there's this, the one free software license called the general public license requires that if you make changes, then you must allow other people all the freedoms that you've been allowed. Meaning, if you make changes, you must allow other people to study those changes. You must allow other people to modify the software that you have changed, that you must allow other people the right to redistribute, etc. Okay. And the question is, doesn't what the government of India is doing, doesn't that violate the GPL? Not necessarily, because GPL applies to not to Debian Linux as a whole, but to the individual components of the software. Okay, and so which is why Debian, for instance, is able to take together software from multiple places all of which are free software, and package it as a whole operating system. So unless they violate the license on one subcomponent of Debian, they aren't violating the GPL itself. And I haven't actually studied the situation in terms of what modifications exactly the government has made in what software within Debian to know whether they are violating the GPL or not. Any other questions?
If you are creating some online communities for specific groups, do they need to come under Registrar of Societies or any of those kinds of acts?
No, they don't. Just as any kind of collection of people doesn't need to come under any, doesn't need to be a trust, doesn't need to be a society. It can just be a collection of people. Okay. Similarly, sorry. Yeah, so that's what it can just be a platform. It can just be a association, right? And it doesn't need to be formally registered with the government. And in fact, the Constitution of India would, if the government required formal registration for all kinds of things, then it would be against the Constitution of India, because it allows for the freedom of association, and you don't need to take any kind of permission from the government to do that. But of course, those freedoms, I think, are eroding. For the first time, we now have laws that enable invisible censorship. Okay, if you're banning a book, you need to go for a court order, or the government needs to pass an order banning a book, banning a film, etc. But now, we from CIS, we sent multiple takedown requests to different companies, and we, in essence, banned stuff from the internet, okay, without anyone finding out about it, okay, and without, we had to keep checking to find out whether
there is no committee of users, I would assume, that has any authority to actually make a dialogue over something like this, because ICMS, I see it as a very big problem.
So,
personally.
For the rest in the room who don't know about the ICMS, that's the central monitoring system that the Department of Telecommunications has now come up with, and which is now going to act. It's been operationalized in April 2013, and it's now going to act as the central place for all communications, interception, surveillance, etc., at a central level. And there have been problems with this. States are having problems with this, saying this shouldn't be a central thing. Central government shouldn't have the right over it. And of course, many organizations are having problems. Privacy organizations are having problems with it. The problem is, again, it was never put out in the public domain. There was never any request for comments from the public by the DOT. There was never anything of the sort. There was an announcement in 2009 in Parliament that, and this was in reply to a parliamentary question, that the government is going to propose a CMS system. In 2011, after Mr. Sybil took over the ministry, there was acceleration of this. It was put as part of the 100-day plan. Okay, and since then it's been on an accelerated path, and now we actually have something apparently that's functional. Yet there is no law that has been passed by Parliament. So at least if laws are passed, you have an opportunity to intervene at that stage through your parliamentarians, through the subcommittees, which generally invite comments from the public, etc. Okay, so the current way that it's actually been brought into force, there hasn't been any opportunity for public comments, or even parliamentarians' comments, or anything of that sort. So there's zero public accountability.
Sounds like we need RFC all over again.
No, because the Telegraph Act under Section 5.2, which allows for interception, requires specific orders for interception under Rule 419A of the Telegraph Rules. No, that sure. Yeah. No, they aren't violating any particular rule by putting this in place, but it is a violation of public accountability of the government because there is no oversight, just as intelligence agencies, for instance, can be created under the Constitution, under an entry of the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution allows for the creation of intelligence agencies, but none of the intelligence agencies we have today were created under that provision. All of them have been created by governmental orders, by notifications, right? So, and not under any statute or act passed by parliament. Okay, so sure, the government can do this, but if it does it this way, there's lack of accountability. And if there is a provision for doing it in a different way with accountability, that is preferable. Okay, which is why even the UID scheme, for instance, there was an attempt to pass a law for that. It can be done as a scheme according to the government, but a law would provide a better accountability platform for it. And I hope that clarifies a little bit about what kinds of opportunities there are for intervention in different ministries and departments. And also shows that sometimes it can be successful, and very often the government can just decide not to listen and to go with what it already has planned.
Seems like there's a very big area of vacuum as far as this is concerned for public intervention, because there is no such provision that I can see.
Actually, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one last thing before I close, which is there is a proposal that the National Advisory Council has been working on for creating a mechanism of green papers and white papers in India, meaning that every single law that the government works on needs to go through multiple stages, including public comments, which right now is a bit of a problem, right? Right now there is no obligation to the government to actually talk about a law until it gets to Parliament. Okay, it's only when it's introduced before Parliament that the law is allowed, that others are allowed to see it. But before it reaches Parliament, you aren't even allowed to acknowledge its existence in a way. And this proposal, which is fashioned on the way laws are passed in other governments, including in South Africa, in Britain, etc., could possibly change that. And so if we want a better, institutionalized form for lawmaking, okay, and public participation in lawmaking, then that is something that we should have passed.